Welcome to Radicards TV on Radicards.com. I'm your host, Patrick Greeno, and today we have Brian Hayes of LinguaSportsCards.com joining us for another episode of Radicards Questions. If you're unfamiliar with this segment, it's 3 questions, 5 minutes each, and we just discuss things back and forth, a little bit of dialogue, with a standard deviation of 3 to 5 minutes for miscellaneous conversation. So, thank you again, Brian, for sitting down with me. Are you excited or nervous about this segment of Radicards Questions?
I'm excited. I'm ready to go.
Okay, let's start this off. Question number 1. Regarding grading and authentication services, in an effort to differentiate, should companies target a specific niche service to champion, or should they try to overall outperform other companies that may hold majority market stake?
Wow, that's a lot to deal with. Um, I think in some ways, when I think of grading, I really think the big two right now are PSA and BGS. And I think in some ways I'm not saying they're all out going for like a niche market, but I would say generally speaking, PSA seems to have a larger market share for the vintage cards. And BGS, while they also have, grading services for vintage, it seems to me that that the collecting community has already decided that PSA is where it's going to be for the vintage cards. So I would say going forward, so anyway, I think that's going to stay true going forward for a long time. PSA for vintage cards, PSA is where the hobby's going to go for the most part. Obviously, individual collectors, they have individual preferences, but generally speaking, once again, the market share seems to be PSA for vintage. Okay. But going forward for modern cards, contemporary, I think BGS has done it right in that they saw a general service out there grading, and they took it to another level with the subgrades and even the autographs. Some people like that; they don't like that. So, to answer your question, I think that the companies are already doing that to a certain extent. BGS is saying we're going to take this service grading, and we're going to try to maybe put a thicker slab, if you will, but the subgrades. So I think the companies are already trying to find that niche markets, and I don't know if there's really much more that they can do in terms of what the service is. I think maybe where the companies will differentiate is when you start looking at non-sports cards, because they authenticate and grade other things besides cards, and I think that might be an option.
2 minutes.
If we're just talking about cards, I don't know if we're going to see much change going forward.
Okay, yeah, I like can understand that certain grading companies have targeted certain eras, and you can throw SGC in there as pre-war guys. They're known for these T206s and things. PSA got a lot of credibility when they graded their first card, which is the Honus Wagner, the Gretzky McNull Wagner. That was the first card that they graded, and it's just continued forward. And they've been kind of a go-to for that, like you said, the vintage category. BGS has done extremely well with modern cards, especially the Bowman Chromes, the various autos and refractors and things like that. I like all 3 of those companies for various different reasons. I've submitted to both BGS and PSA in the past. My Superfractor looks awesome in a BGS case. The question comes down to, do grading companies, should they target a niche type of service, or should they try to outperform all the other grading companies in all the capacities? And I'm always subscribed of the mindset of focus on your strengths and develop them to even be stronger, right?
Okay.
And so, and you said it's hard to identify what can be done in addition to what's already been done. What else can be done? I really like BGS's for their quad subgrades. It's nice to see that okay, this is a 9 in centering, but it's a 9.5 in edges. I like that. I think that's great. And I also like that they've now have in-house grading, Beckett authentication services. I really like that too. I think it's a great move forward for them. So good comments. I think that was good dialogue on that question. Question two: given the common correlation, not causation, between price and quality, at what point does cost negatively impact the desirability of a product?
Um, well, once again, this is a difficult question to answer because there's such a wide range of collectors, and the different groups of collectors have different buying power.
Right.
Um, so once again, this question, I think it might come down to the individual buyer. I would say that um, for contemporary cards, there's so many high end. Like if we're talking baseball cards, Topps has come out with a lot of high end sets over the last couple of years. Dynasty, Transcendent, Tier 1, 5-star. At some point, the market as a whole gets flooded, suppressing the value, it looks like at least, the value of some of these cards. So I would say that um, it, I, I would say for an individual set, I think, for whatever reason, if an individual set is popular, prices can skyrocket. But for the hobby as a whole, when you start having multiple, you know, high level sets, I think eventually the cost of all those sets for Topps to create them, for example, eventually the value that is drawn from those cards, it just isn't there. There's just too many of those types of cards in the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like high quality product just as much as I like low quality product because I'm one of those like varieties of spice of life kind of guys. I like to see different things. I like to see competition in the market. It drives innovation. I'm all about that. I think it's great. I will say though that when I see products that are so highly priced, the return that it has come back when people try to churn what they've gotten out of the box or the case or the set or whatever. And then I'm looking at eBay sales on some of this stuff and I'm thinking to myself, man, to buy that product and to resell it doesn't make any financial sense. It would make more financial sense to keep it sealed and resell it. But then you're
Yeah,
thinking if you're already buying it on the secondary and then you go to resell it, you have to make a profit on it. Do you wait till later to make the profit on the sealed wax? Kind of like when we see sealed boxes of say 84 tops, opening that product and trying to sell the cards already opened, you're not going to make the same return as if you would to sell it already just still sealed. Sealed wax just holds that premium, right? Because there's always that what if. So my thing is with high-end product, is it better just to leave it sealed and sell it as it is? Granted, we're seeing a lot of people break in the individual teams and go through the breaking process of, people securing spots. They're making money doing that, and I think that's fantastic. But as a collector that's not doing the breaks, that just wants to buy the box and maybe wants to sell what we get out of the box, but we're not doing breaks, do we open the product or do we just turn the product around?
yeah. I I know for me personally, I've I'm not interested in buying like very expensive boxes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not that I can just do that all the time, but
Right.
the opportunity has been there. But it's too much hit and miss. It's too much of a gamble. Like you were saying, you can find the cards inside that you want, you know, um, real easier and more financially prudent, I guess, on the open market. It's it's um, it's something that for me personally, um, it makes me just not want to purchase those sealed boxes. If I ever did, if for some reason I came across, as you were saying, I would probably keep it sealed and hold on to it, or just sell as a sealed box or pack, whatever the case may be. Another thing, very briefly, I know we're on a time limit,
Sure.
but with high level cards, and a lot of those now have such so low serial numbered. Um, it, I don't know if grading those cards really adds any value to the card. If there's some card with the print run of 5 or 10, there's only 5 or 10 of those copies anyway. Does grading that really make that card more unique? Whereas a lot of cards that have higher production runs, getting them graded with a high grade, that high graded value really adds something to the card. But like when I see something, for example, Topps Dynasty numbered out of 5 or 10, and a lot of those cards aren't being graded, but the ones that are, and I see those being graded. So I'm just sort of thinking about grading still.
Sure.
A lot of those graded cards, when they are graded, and I see that as a PSA 9 or 10, it doesn't really change my feeling of that card. The serial number is so low. So I guess what I'm saying is, in a lot of cases, if you want to increase the value of a card, what you can do is get it graded, and if you've got it high grade, it's really going to shoot up the value of that card. But for this high-end stuff that you're referring to, if it's already a low print run, I don't know in all cases. Sometimes it does, but in a lot of cases, I don't think it does. There's already a low print run. Getting it graded doesn't really add anything.
I think when we're talking about value, and bring up some good points, like my superfractor I pulled, I got it slabbed by BGS, and I love it. It looks great in this slab. I just think it's fantastic. Do I intend to sell it? No. But if I did, I'd get a great return on it because it's graded, but also just because it's a superfractor. Whether or not it's because I'm getting a good return because it's graded, or it's a superfractor, or it's both, that's sort of debatable. It doesn't really matter. It's a one of one, right? The only one.
Right.
I like the look of certain cards graded. I think it looks just awesome in the slab. Modern cards, I think, look fantastic in BGS cases. I just think rookie cards with rookie autos, whatever, they just look awesome in BGS cases. Raw, they look fine too. I just think that the eye appeal when you have the slab, if you're talking about grading, just drastically improves the desire to have the card. But at the same time, you might have to pay a little bit more because it's graded, because there's a grading cost, etc. So, good stuff. I'm glad we got to cover that. Question 3. How is investment potential measured by players with high current net worth but uncertain long-term market value?
Give me an example of a player. Are you thinking of someone like Trout?
You could say Trout. I look at guys that are just coming onto the scene, brand new rookies, super highly touted, a lot of expectations, a lot of market value presently right now. They're garnering a lot of costs, a lot of value coming in from eBay sales, pack sales, whatever else. Stuff's getting graded and everything else. Just there's a lot of interest and focus on these guys, but we don't know how their career is going to pan out in the next 2 to 3 years, right? We don't know where that's going to go. I hope guys like Chris Bryant do well, and Trout continues to do well, and Bryce Harper has a long career. But there have been many instances where a lot of focus has been driven towards certain rookies that didn't actually pan out. So how is investment potential measured by these players?
It seems to me that there's usually a small window of time where a player's performance precedes the market's recognition of that player's talent. So for a lot of mega prospects that everyone knows about, those cards, when the player comes onto the scene, those cards sell. If he keeps doing well, those cards keep selling. It seems to me that the biggest potential for investment are those good prospects, but who are maybe under the radar a little bit, but who are definitely have a chance at stardom. And then if those good players turn great, there's that window of time there where the player's performance is really starting to pick up, and the general fan hasn't recognized that player's talent coming through. And if you're sort of watching the sport and the market, the card market, you can get your hands on that player's cards maybe before the general collector or sports fan recognizes it. I think those are the players where you can make the most in return on your investment. Someone like Trout, or Trout, like Bryant. Let's go back like Chris Bryant. You know, I can't say with absolute certainty, but it seems like he's been so well known for such a long time. I think his cards are going up, but I think everyone who is collecting, not everyone, a large portion of the collecting community has recognized him for a long time. So it's harder to, sort of have not the insider knowledge, but to have that knowledge of when to buy and sell, because so many people are aware of his performance on field.
So you're saying track guys, kind of as far back as their minor league career, starting back there and watching them progress forward, and hoping that that performance translates to the professional atmosphere, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and but I would still say it's all about balance. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a good investment to go after a lot of guys who are your run of the mill minor league prospect, and hoping 1 out of 10 guys pans out. If you do that, I think in the long run you're going to get burned because most of those guys don't pan out. But there's a class of prospects where they're not mega prospects and they're not your average drafted guy who's going through the system. There's If you can find those 4 or 5 guys maybe per year that maybe will be given playing time because they're on the right team.
Mm-hmm.
The team has a spot for them, or just for whatever reason, maybe has shown something that is a little bit under the radar, but is noticeable if you're taking the time to go find those guys. I think those kind of guys. I'm trying to think of an example. I can't really do it off the top of my head, but I think even I think like Trout was for a little while like that. Like, he was not at the very beginning a super mega prospect. Certainly not what he has become.
All right.
And so I think there's that window of time, the right player, and just that small. There's like a gap there. Usually, maybe 1 season's worth of playing time.
All right.
That might be a good time to buy and then sell when the market recognizes.
Yeah, those are. This is an interesting conversation because, it's always one's hope to be able to judge a player's performance over time. Guys like Josh Donaldson took some years to develop. Mariano Rivera took years to develop. Heck, even Curt Schilling was well into his career before he was noticed as like a pretty, powerful pitcher, pretty effective pitcher. So, I even Trout's the latest guy that he, I talked about this in a recent entry about Mike Trout rookie cards, that he wasn't one of those guys that was overhyped. He kind of came on the scene while other guys were being talked about, and he was outperforming like consistently. And so over the course of a couple years, he had amassed like, a lot of awards and amazing statistics, just incredible stuff. But he wasn't one of those guys like, oh my gosh, Trout's coming on the scene. It's 2009. We got to get his cards. It's more like, oh my gosh, it's 2012. We have to now buy Trout cards that came out last year. It's like, so I actually kind of think that that's beneficial when guys aren't hyped, because it allows the stress level to be minimal for the players so that they can perform, because what they need is to be confident to perform well, and that'll drive more confidence that will additionally allow them to perform even better. So when they're stressed out, when you and I are stressed out, our performance can be compromised in some capacity. And I think you and I think maybe you have in your work, in my work, I know I have in my past. And I understand that it's important to draw media attention to guys in the hopes that it'll draw hobby attention, and it essentially comes out of the dollar, right? You draw media attention, you draw traffic to something, you can sell advertising. I get it. But it's also nice to let players develop naturally, and then see where they go, and then cover them as they develop forward. But again, we're talking about what's good investment potential. So you're actually doing the research well prior to the coverage of their highlights. And
Right.
I need to do more of this myself to really understand minor leaguers. I just don't do it. I wait and kind of see, but I'm also not a prospector, so it's not really within me to kind of go about this in a way. But it is nice to see who's coming up. But I will say that And the high school market's different than the college market. That's different than the minor league market. That's different than the professional market, right? And to be
Right.
good at every level, you have to be the best at every level. And it consistently gets more and more competitive as you go. That's why the guy that's the best in college might not be the best in the pros, because he's up with everybody else that was the best in their colleges. This is maybe another conversation for another question, but I like to think about these things because in a way it keeps us engaged in sports and allows us to really get more excited about who's coming up and who's performing well and who's exceeding in their seasoned years. And I like watching this kind of thing. I like thinking about players and where they're going and how they've been doing. Even the guys who have had floundered careers, I like to look back and think, at one point, we thought he was going to be a superstar, you know. And so,
Yeah.
good stuff, man. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Radicards Questions. Mr. Brian Hayes from LinguaSportsCards.com. My name is Patrick Greeno, owner of Radicards.com. Thank you for watching another episode of Radicards TV on Radicards.com. And until next time, enjoy collecting. If you like this video, please subscribe. Enjoy collecting. Thank you.